Time to go in the lab here on Market Science. I'm Butch Stearns of the Pulse Network. Here's where we look behind the scenes of campaigns and industry research when it comes to digital marketing. And Alan Bonde, Chief Marketing Officer of the Pulse. Alan, I've been walking by your office lately, and you're like Robin Williams and Flubber in there. You're like Eddie Murphy and the Nutty Professor. You got the goggles on, the cauldrons are boiling.
The beakers are boiling.
Yes. What have you been doing in there?
So as we've been rolling out IMS this year, so in New York, San Francisco, and Boston, we're coming up on 5 years in Boston, 4th time in San Francisco. And what we've been doing is sort of taking a look back in terms of the market, in terms of social networks, basically taking stock of how far we've come and how far we have to go. So I've been pulling all sorts of data together in terms of social media, in terms of content creation, and we've been formulating in the lab sort of a new model that hopes to pull that all together.
So we got a new model from the research you've been doing. All right, tell us about this new model.
It really comes at this from two perspectives. And we talk a lot about this at the Pulse, right? It's really about content and it's about channels. And so first thing that we look to do is to take a look at the new channels. So that's kind of one of the inputs to this exercise, was taking a look at what's been happening on the channels that were around 3 or 4 years ago in terms of Facebook and Twitter, but also take a look at what's happening in terms of the new channels. So we've got Google Plus that we've talked a lot about. We've got Instagram and Pinterest and all these new channels, and basically taking a look at how those channels are influencing and providing opportunities for marketers as they build their campaigns.
And I love the way you put this together when you look at 2009 and now, and look at the not born yet on those right there. I mean, you're talking less than 3 years ago.
I mean, that's the amazing thing, is how quickly the audience, and we know this, right? The audience moves sort of from one media to the next when the switching costs are really low. And it really brings up an interesting question about Facebook. So Facebook's certainly been in the news with the IPO recently, and people are thinking about the 900 million users on Facebook. What's next for them? How many things does Facebook have to do, either good or bad, that'll either move them off of Facebook or make them even more loyal as Facebook users? So I think as a marketer, we have to think about all of these sort of our portfolio of options when we look at our media programs, and then we have to sort of divvy up where we're going to put our attention and where we're going to put our spend. So that was one of the inputs.
So when you do this research, as the digital marketer, me out there as the inbound marketer, when I look at my website, when I look at trying to drive inbound traffic, as we reveal these numbers and you look at this model, isn't it important to, I think this is an important point to emphasize, but I'm going to ask the question, isn't it important to emphasize that we're talking about the social channels for business, not just the fact that there's these hundreds of millions of people that are on there?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think a lot of the things that we do are from a business-to-business perspective, but in a lot of ways, business-to-business being informed by consumers. So you look at photo sharing, you look at uploading of videos in terms of YouTube. So it's sort of the other side of the coin, right? So we have the new channels and we have all the content that's now being created on those channels. A lot of this is being driven by consumer use. So you look at the amount of photos that are uploaded on Facebook. Most of those are consumer pictures. But then you look at the hours of video that's going on YouTube, and we know just here at the Pulse how much content we're producing and we're pumping onto our YouTube channels, our partners' YouTube channels. So in a way, if you take a look at what's happening on the consumer side, it also kind of informs your thinking about the business side as well. So as these things come together, we're seeing some pretty interesting things. So number one, you look at kind of the fusion of different channels. So you look at a couple data points at the bottom here, to your point about business. You've got the adoption of mobile channels. You've got almost 50% of US cellular phone subscribers now have a smartphone. So basically everybody has a computer in their pocket, and they can do things like online shopping. They can do things that they couldn't do with the traditional wireless device. So you've got these people who are now using this device as sort of a second screen. We've talked about that with Mike Prue and others, where you're now consuming more and more video content. Some of that content may certainly be consumer content, but what's the opportunity to reach a business buyer, say at a trade show, for example, with your content that's formatted for a mobile device, and you're presenting a short form video as they're walking around a trade show floor, for example. So I think for every consumer example, there's some business examples as well.
All right, so you've done all this research, and to me it reinforces a lot of the lessons that we've learned at Inbound Marketing Summit over the years. And again, inboundmarketingsummit.com is where you can go to find out about San Francisco, about October in Boston, our big event every year, Inbound Marketing Summit, that's coming up here this year. And what gets reinforced to me is that a tried and true business practice. You need to go where your customers are. And as these social channels evolve, as new ones pop up, heck, by the time we get to IMS in Boston in October, there'll be a new social channel that's popped up. The odds are that's going to happen. You need to go where they are, or you need to go where your customers are. There's the B2B side of it. And to do that, to keep up with the social channels, you always have to keep in mind mobile, because mobile is now, leads to everything, because everybody wants to do it on the go. That's where consumers are all the time. So what other lessons are we learning from this? What else is your research telling you that we should take out of this?
So I'm glad you brought up mobile, because mobile really fits in, it's sort of an in-between channel. It's a consumer channel for sure, but also it's increasingly a business channel, and it's a way that we reach people. So like mobile devices while people are in the car, whether walking around a trade show, where they're in a store, for example. But it's also a channel that requires specific content. So if you look at pulling all this together, you've got the channels, you've got the content, you've got mobile, and if you look at IMS as we've evolved it from New York, we have certain tracks, right? We've got a mobile track, we've got a content automation track, we have an inbound marketing track, and we have a convergence track. As we move forward into Boston, we're really going to continue to evolve that into, you can envision a sort of content track in general and a channel track in general. And that's really how the model comes together. And in fact, if we take a look at it, it really is how the pieces fit together. And we see it right here on the screen. There's really three quadrants, three building blocks.
Look, that's an impressive
The power of the wheel. It's kind of an eye chart, but that's the point, that there's a lot of things that people have to think about. And at the center, it's content. So we preach it, we talk about it. It starts with your content model, the right mix of expert content, curated content, and user content. That's where it all starts, but how you distribute it is a function of sort of who you're trying to reach, to your point. So if you look at the channels around the outside, there's really three layers to this model. Content's at the core, there's your tools that enable and enrich that content. So things like SEO, your listening platform, your location data if you're doing things on mobile, your streaming partner if you're pushing things out to a remote audience, your social scoring if you're trying to figure out who are the most important people to reach. The inner part of this wheel are the tools that you use. The middle part of this wheel are the applications and the platforms. So if you think about some of the things that we've done, for example, like NAB Show, we developed a content strategy, we created a streaming plan so we would broadcast, we used our online video platform, we built a microsite to help them reach their target audience. If you look at some of the social campaigns, same thing. So we envision people starting to use this model to kind of figure out who they're targeting, what channel they're going to use, and then what's the right mix of tools and technology that makes it happen. And the purpose of this is to try to have one picture that allows people to sort of navigate all the moving parts.
All right, so the question directly I want to ask you is, as you went into this research, what did you end up learning? That's the direct question I want to ask you, and I want to ask it from a reporter's perspective. So here's what I mean. Me as a reporter by nature in my whole career, I always went into a story, whether it was a feature story on a person or a subject or whatever, knowing that I knew something about the subject, but with a curious mind because I wanted to learn things. And if you always had that mind, you come out invariably learning something that you didn't think. So you dove into this research. You had a good idea of what you were trying to prove, trying to document, and what you were trying to say. But like me as the reporter, do you often come out with something that's like a light bulb moment it's probably not inventing the wheel, or maybe you did. You actually did invent the wheel or reinvented the wheel. But what was your light bulb moment? What did you learn out of this?
So there's probably two things. One is, if you look at back to your point about businesses adopting the consumer, and you look at the McKinsey data on the adoption of things like social networking, blogging, we kind of take it for granted that every business is using those technologies. But really, if you look at the data, it's at most half of all the businesses. And these are global businesses that they looked at. So in a way, businesses are still moving towards this, maybe at a sort of a plodding pace. So in one hand, we're still early on when it comes to adoption by businesses of social technology. The other thing, and it's not in the data here on these slides, the other thing that was interesting is if you look at the web, so you look at the top web properties, and we've talked a lot about sort of social networks and content. If you look at the top most popular websites, and you look at what the most popular websites were 3 or 4 years ago, it's basically the same list. And so we think about the internet being sort of relatively new, but then you start talking about like post-digital, and you realize that it's still on both lists, Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and Wikipedia and Amazon. It's still the same set of names. So in a way, we really are moving past sort of the digital phase where there's not a lot of upside. The parts aren't moving a whole lot. It's established who the big players are on the web. The new frontier really is social and mobile, and that's where a lot of the action is going to be.
Interesting. So a final point about this to wrap up what you're saying is that I find fascinating is that the two things you just said, that the popular sites are still popular, meaning that we may see other social channels evolve, but they're really offsprings of the popular sites,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's right. And I think the point is when you talk about sort of the mainstays, in a way, the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles of the world have become sort of the traditional media. So they've become the incumbents,
Right.
and the Pinterests and the Instagrams and some of these new sort of social mobile sites, they're now the new kind of challengers like Amazon was 10 years ago versus Walmart or versus the traditional retailers. So we've sort of moved a generation forward. The early movers of the internet, the people who were shaking things up 10 years ago, they're now kind of the old guard, and now you have a whole bunch of new people that are coming along, which is pretty interesting.
Well, the other thing you brought up about the 50%, hit that stat again. What is that stat about the 50%?
So McKinsey has done this 5 years running, a global survey of like 4,000 companies of how they're adopting different social technologies, Web 2.0, if you will. And one of the stats is how many of those companies have adopted social networks, how many of them have adopted blogs. And you'd think that that would be like 80, 90%, but really it's only around 50%. So you still have globally a lot of companies that have not embraced these social technologies. Some of them may never embrace them, but I think it points out that we kind of fool ourselves sometimes thinking that people are further along than they are, and there's still a reasonable amount of hard work and opportunity to get the other half on board.
Well, I'll tell you that what I take from that second stat to wrap up this segment is that no matter where you are, if you're in digital marketing, if you're in the tools and technology end of it, if you're in the strategy end of it, if you're in the content creation, syndication, and automation part of it like we are at the Pulse Network, think about that stat that only 50% are adopters. There's plenty of opportunity out there still, meaning that there's that other 50% where the light bulb hasn't even gone off yet, or they haven't taken the action to do it. Great segment, Alan. So obviously it's working over in that. I'm waiting for something to blow up.
I think I left a Bunsen burner on. I better go run.
He's got to go back into his office now, Alan Bonde, and turn the Bunsen burners back on and check in with Robin Williams and Eddie Murphy. I'm Butch Stearns. This is In the Lab, part of Market Science here on the Pulse Network at thepulsenetwork.com.
The Pulse Network. It's social TV.
It's the must-attend conference for digital, social, and mobile marketing, and it's returning to San Francisco on June 12th through the 13th at the Cowell Theater Fort Mason Center. With a unique mix of inspirational speakers, industry watchers and experts, cutting-edge content, and real-world case studies, IMS is where innovative marketing professionals meet up, participate in sessions, and network with their peers. Please visit inboundmarketingsummit.com for more information.